5,
4.
You're going too fast.
Oh.
4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's been live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Before we get into tonight's topics, which are very hot, those critical,
spicy hot
turning point Canadian election, spicy hot, super spice, and Trump's 100 days, I want to thank our audience.
Whoa.
Yeah, we've had a very loyal, very brilliant audience. We've learned a lot from our audience. They ask terrific questions. And I know I've said this before, but I just want to emphasize how much we appreciate and admire our audience.
Wow, that was very nice of you.
Thank you.
You didn't tell me you were going to do that.
Well, nothing like spontaneity, right?
Nothing like spontaneity. And also go Knicks.
Yeah. They were ahead by 1 point at the half. If they win this, they win the first round, but they still have a long way to go. And by the way, also appreciate the boss here, the producer, the head honcho, Sam Lichtman.
Me?
Without Sam, none of this would even be possible.
Wow, thanks.
Yeah.
Do you want to sing the Canadian anthem together?
I don't sing anything.
Oh, Canada.
That's pretty good.
That's all I know.
Trump would want it to be, the Star-Spangled Banner, right?
Well, you mean he wants the national anthem of Canada?
He wants to absorb Canada, right?
I see. Well, it seems like that's not going to happen anymore, right? Because the Liberals have won. They didn't win a total, what's it? I don't know. Majority. But Mark Carney is the new prime minister.
Correct.
Pierre Poilievre is out.
He's out. He lost his own seat. Not only did his party fall well short of a plurality, he actually lost his own seat that his party had held for the last 20 years.
Not good for him.
Not good. And, this is pretty momentous. This is the Trump effect, which we'll talk about in a few moments, spilling across the border into our northern neighbor, Canada. Roll back a year. You got it? How was the Liberal Party of Justin Trudeau doing, Sam?
It was in the tank. It was in
they
the
were
deep
in the
hole.
Tank. Justin Trudeau had worn out his welcome. The polling numbers were dismal. The economy was in trouble. Voters were unhappy. And all the pundits were saying what at the time, Sam?
The Liberals are done for.
The Liberals are finished. They're done for, put a fork in it. And then what happened? Donald Trump. And Donald Trump alone turned this around because there was no big rebound in the economy or, some fundamental change in the situation in Canada. It all came from the south of the border, from Donald Trump, in effect, waging a non-military war against Canada. That is, imposing needless, gratuitous tariffs on Canadian goods, and then claiming Canada really should be a province of the United States, that he just wanted to gobble up Canada. Forget about, the interests of the Canadian people, what the Canadian people might want. That nothing matters for Trump except what Trump wants. Well, you can imagine the Canadian people did not take it well for an economic arrow being aimed at their heart and for Donald Trump utterly disregarding the nationalist preferences of the Canadian people themselves and thinking only about himself. The result was one of the most extraordinary turnarounds in the political history in the short run of any country.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Suddenly the Liberals rose from the dead. They had a very effective banker-type economic expert, Mark Carney, as their candidate. But what they were fundamentally benefiting from was the anti-Trump effect. That is, of course, the Liberal Party is the party most antithetical to Trump, the Conservative Party of Pierre Polyev. Did I get that right?
Why can't we get some of this anti-Trump effect here in the United States?
Well, we're getting it too late. We're going to talk about that in a moment.
True.
And this is, the significance of this goes beyond Canada. Because, in fact, until we saw the reality of Donald Trump. See, that was the problem. Canadians have seen the reality of Donald Trump.
That's true.
We didn't see that before the 2024 election.
Wow.
We just had this hazy reflection.
We didn't see it from 2016 to 2020?
They didn't. The truth is, all presidents look way better in retrospect. George W. Bush finished somewhere in the 30% range when he left the White House. A few years later, he was in the high 50% range. People tend to filter.
Take a sip of some water.
Yeah, Spindrift.
What are you drinking tonight?
Carbonated water.
Nice. Spindrift. What do you call it?
Spendrift.
It's not. Where do you see an A there?
Oh, it's Spindrift.
Not Spandrift.
I kind of like Spendrift, but
Okay.
that's all right. People tend to filter out the bad and only remember the good. So Trump was benefiting from the halo effect of a past term, which has been typical of presidents, not just for Donald Trump. And if you look at the world, Sam, that's why this Canadian election is so important. Donald Trump style politicians and parties were in the ascendancy all over the world, just as Donald Trump somehow would make this miraculous comeback and win the presidential election. We were seeing right-wing parties and candidates on the rise around the world. And, of course, this was this, totally distorted, totally Pollyannish notion of Donald Trump. Oh, he's going to come back and clean up the corruption and bring down grocery prices, end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, boom the economy, introduce a new golden age. How much of that actually happened, Sam?
Did you hear me laughing?
Yes.
Right.
I think we got the point. The golden age turns out to be Donald Trump is the anti-alchemist. Alchemists wanted to convert lead into gold. Well, he converted his promised golden age into dead weight lead on the American people and the American economy. And that, of course, had reverberations in Canada. And we're now seeing, now that people are aware of the reality of Donald Trump and the right wing in America and around the world, not just in Canada, but around the world, liberal parties that care about democracy, that are not just for the rich, that care about ordinary people, are on the rise all around the world because they've seen the reality of Donald Trump. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see it until we elected him.
You know what? There's obviously, we'll get to the polling in a little bit, but I've heard there's a lot of people who are now, quote unquote, regretting voting for Donald Trump who voted for him. You know what? I don't have any sympathy for them. He was crystal clear throughout his campaign what he was going to do. This idea that these people who voted for him are now like, wait, I don't like any of this. He said he was going to do all this on the campaign. I got no sympathy for him.
And what did we say on this show about what Donald Trump is saying? Take it seriously.
Right.
He doesn't joke. He's not a comedian. He's not funny.
Well, he is funny.
Well, he's funny in a sense that his persona is funny.
I laugh at him, but not with him.
Exactly.
Yes.
We warned everyone for months upon months upon months. You've got to take this seriously. He is going to do all these horrific things that he has talked about. And obviously, not going to do these crazy things he promised, like ending the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, one day. How many days have passed now, Sam?
100.
100. And how far has he gotten to ending the Ukraine war?
Probably backwards.
It's probably gone backwards, exactly. Less likely to end the war than during the first 24 hours.
Although he did have that meeting with Zalinski in the Vatican, which maybe that was something good, but nobody seems to know what they talked about.
Yeah, and so far he is, his peace plan is Zalinski end the war on Russian terms, or we're going to give you nothing. We're going to give everything Putin wants and nothing to you. It's just not going to happen.
I almost have more respect for the people who voted for him and still say they approve of him. I know that sounds a little bit crazy.
That sounds crazy.
I know, but I just have so little respect for people who voted for him and then now throwing up their hands like, wait a second, I don't really like this. It's like,
you voted for this.
I heard Joe Rogan the other day talking about, I think he was reacting to the students who were being rounded up on the streets, and he's all up in arms about it. It's like, dude, you were supporting this guy throughout his entire campaign, throughout his inauguration. He was saying he was going to round up people and deport them. He said it point blank. I don't have any sympathy for Joe Rogan or any. I'm not gonna be like, yeah, Joe, you're right. It is. I mean, it is bad, but
it's predictively bad.
Right.
This is not like predicting an election, which is really hard. This was not hard. He was right out saying these things. And if you knew anything about Donald Trump, you got to take seriously what he says. He's not being sarcastic. He's not joking. He's not being hyperbolic. He's not just putting this out for political purposes. He is dead serious about what he is going to do. And it's just astonishing what he's done in just 100 days. There are economic experts who say if this continues much longer, it could take a decade or more for the American economy to recover. There are foreign policy experts who say America may never in our lifetime, certainly not in mine, maybe in yours, regain our standing in the world that has been so fundamentally damaged by Donald Trump. It would take a very long time to repair our standing. It's not just his dissing of NATO, his siding with the dictators. It's also his tariff war against our allies. And his withdrawal of USAID programs that have saved tens of millions of lives around the world and are essential to America's standing. Sam, we've said so many times, America pulls out, who pulls in?
Myanmar.
Yeah, right. El Salvador.
I do want to say, last time somebody sent us their analysis of the keys for Canada, and they weren't able to come on, but I was just looking at an email they sent me earlier this week. They did predict Mark Carney was going to win.
Really?
Yeah, I just was looking at their results.
I've had sent to me a big, thick book on keys to UK elections. I've had another book on keys to some South American elections. Now we have Canadian elections. I did miss the last election, but I'm still 10-1. So it's not exactly a discredited system. And I had some pretty good explanations. I'm not claiming, it was a stolen election or anything like that. But my point was that I've made throughout, even before the election, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not Mike Johnson who claims the Almighty speaks to him. My system is based on history. And there were a lot of things that happened in 2024 to break the pattern of history. But I don't want to belabor that point. Now, let's get to the second thing we want to talk about, Sam.
Oh.
It's not just, critics like us saying Trump's golden age has become leaden. It is the American people themselves. If you can put up that chart.
What's up?
Trump's approval rating has cratered in just 100 days. Look, in the latest poll, he's about 16 points underwater. His approval ratings on average are lower than any prior president since World War II, since they began taking these polls, since the end of World War II, even lower than, guess who? Donald Trump in his first
part uno.
Term. He had set the record for the worst approval rating. Now he's broken his own record.
And this is a poll from Ipsos, ABC News, Washington Post, just so people know.
It's a very solid poll. And by the way, who's Trump's favorite cable outlet?
Fox News.
And their polls show basically the same thing. These polls are not outliers. There are small differences among them, of course, but they all show Trump's approval rating deeply underwater. And when you dig in, it's even worse for Trump. Really? He's even holding this level because he still has overwhelming Republican support. Although that's eroded a bit, but it's still very strong. But obviously, he has virtually no Democratic support. But the real problem for Trump is he's cratered among that third group, Sam, not Republicans or Democrats, but independents. He is well over 20 points underwater with independents. That's a disaster for Trump. Plus, when you look at the issues, he is underwater on every domestic and foreign policy issue, even slightly underwater on what he thought was his signature issue where he'd have overwhelming approval, and that is immigration. On the issue that voters think is most important, the economy, he's down in the low 30% range in his approval. Most Americans think under Trump, the economy is going to get worse, not better. This golden age for ordinary Americans just isn't happening at all.
Do we need to give him more time?
Well, obviously things can change, but, this is remarkably low. As I said, it's an all-time record at 100 days for any American president. Plus, it's not just the polls.
What?
There are other information we have that confirms what the polls are telling us. Remember, these are not horse race polls. You know how down I am on horse race polls as predictors. These are snapshots. They just tell you what the president's approval rating is at this point in time and enables you to compare it to other presidents at the same point in time. And as I said, he's broken the record for the lowest approval rating in modern presidential history. But it's not just the polls. There's other confirming evidence about Trump's disapproval. Just today, there was a news report saying consumer confidence has plunged again, and it's now at the lowest level in 20 years. We're also seeing people voting with their feet. We have these town hall meetings by Republicans, some of them in swing districts, and some of them in solidly Republican districts. And how well are those meetings going for the Republicans, Sam?
People are going like this. We don't like it.
His own constituency, whether they claim, they regret their vote or not, are up in arms about what Trump is doing. And in addition, of course, you have millions of people out in the streets protesting. And by the way, it's not just the economy that people are unhappy about with Trump.
What else?
An overwhelming majority thinks he's gone too far with his assertion of presidential authority. I think he just once again said, I run the nation and the world, in an unscripted telephone conversation.
I heard he's running for Pope now.
I've heard that.
No, I'm kidding.
I'm kidding. Of course, we do kid, unlike Trump. American people overwhelmingly think he's gone too far with his claims about presidential power and his executive orders. Another confirming point is what's happening to him in the courts. There have been over 100 court filings. And how has Trump done in the courts?
Not good.
Not good. And again, an overwhelming majority of the American people oppose his attacks on the court. Don't think, judges should be impeached because they rule against Trump. And they by an overwhelming majority believe that Trump ought to quite properly follow court orders. As we've seen, while he has not directly said, I'm not obeying this order, in fact, in practice, he's disobeyed a lot of the orders, including facilitating the return of Abrego Garcia, and also a lot of executive orders about firings and the dismantling of federal agencies. Justice delayed is justice denied. And this is Trump's MO. Obstruct, deflect, delay until you've got what you want.
Right. No doubt. What was the final? I know. Back to the Canadian election for a second. We were looking at before the stream. Do you have the numbers of how many seats they are away from a majority?
I think they're at 169, which puts them 3 seats away from a majority, and the Conservatives are something like 143, I believe, 15 or 16 behind. They will get a majority. There's enough votes in sympathetic minor parties like the Greens and the Democrats,
right,
that they're going to get a majority, but it's a coalition. It's not an outright, liberal governance. I'm not expert enough in Canadian politics to know how much of a difference that makes, but I do know at least it makes some difference.
Gotcha.
And I don't think there are enough seats that haven't been decided yet that there really is a chance for the Liberals to get a majority, but they'll have no trouble putting together a coalition government, being just 3 seats shy. Remember, in Canada, you don't directly elect the executive. Rather, the choice of a prime minister depends upon the party strength in Parliament.
Right.
It's a very different kind of government.
Which do you prefer?
I do not have a strong opinion. There are strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
The strengths of the parliamentary government is you don't have the imperial executive. You don't have to impeach. You can have a vote of no confidence, right?
Right. Get them out of there.
Get them out of there really easily. The disadvantages, we've seen it not so much in this election, but to some extent, but in a lot of elections in Europe, it's fragmentary. Right, it tends to factionalize and make it more difficult to govern. So each system has its strengths and weaknesses. We're not switching to a parliamentary system.
It's pretty difficult to govern right now in America, too.
It sure is.
It has been for a long time.
For a long time, yeah. But I'm not, yeah. I like the parliamentary government, actually, but it's pie in the sky.
Right,
It would take a total revision of the Constitution to move there. And we've said, many, many times, there aren't going to be any constitutional amendments anytime soon.
Yeah. I just feel like, especially like right now in America, it's just, for years I felt this, even before Trump, that the president has too much power.
Well,
And it's not even concrete power. It's almost like this existential power in people's minds and hearts,
There was a lot of thought to this at the Constitutional Convention, particularly by James Madison, the great framer of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Not the sole one, but the lead. And what he said was, we have put in the Constitution lots of checks and balances, right? Lots of distribution and separation of powers. But in the end, none of that is going to matter unless we have virtue in government. In other words, you need good people, because whatever the safeguards, bad people can override them. This goes way back to the 18th century and the great statesman James Madison.
Doesn't feel like we have a whole lot of virtue in our government right now, I have to say. Maybe the least ever.
I have my telescope. I've looked far and wide for it, and I have yet to find it. And by the way, a brand new scandal, maybe you don't call it a scandal, but it's certainly another big mishap.
What?
By our favorite cabinet member. Who's that?
Hegseth?
Hegseth.
Again?
He's up there with RFK Jr. But so he claims he just eliminated a program to bring women into security arrangements, saying this is another woke, crazy liberal. Guess who adopted that program?
Wait, say it again? Sorry?
A program to bring women into security positions within the military.
He ended it.
Yes, saying it was woke.
Okay.
And guess who adopted that program?
Trump?
Trump, of course. Yeah. Adopted by Congress, signed by Donald Trump. I mean, he's not only, I think, evil, but phenomenally incompetent. It terrorizes me. It scares me to the bottom of my bones to think this guy is going to be responsible if we have a major military crisis.
Yeah, I also think, like I said earlier, the president is just so powerful in they're almost like a king, like in just the hearts and minds of Americans. People care more about the presidential election. They don't even know who their local representatives are.
They don't even know who their senators.
I'm about to say they don't even know who their senators are. And
right. Yeah, you're right.
And those people have probably a lot more say on your day-to-day life than the president does.
I've written a whole book on this.
No, you haven't.
Of course I have. I've written a book on everything.
No, not on the opera.
Not on the opera.
Right.
And don't look for one anytime soon. But I have written a book called 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump, in which I point out the problem is not just Trump. As Sam quite correctly indicates, there are all kinds of holes in our democratic system that enables, a non-virtuous president to exploit it and gain this kind of untrammeled or nearly untrammeled power to the great detriment of the American people.
What does trammeled mean?
Untrammeled means unchecked.
Oh, I've never heard that word before.
Live and learn.
You're a smart guy, I guess.
I don't know.
All right. You have anything else on your mind? Are you ready to get to questions?
I have a lot on my mind, but I think, after so effusively, that word, right?
Yes.
Praising our audience, I think it's time we go to the audience.
Knicks are down by 6.
Oh, no. How did that happen?
3:37 left in the third.
All right. They still have time. What's happening with the Yankees?
The Yankees?
The Yankees.
They were like, I had 9-0 or something, weren't they?
They were 12-3 or something.
It's 15-2, bottom of the ninth.
I think that's pretty solid.
Yeah.
My favorite player had another home run, too.
Aaron Judge.
Aaron Judge, yeah.
All right, before we get to questions, we have almost 1,600 people watching. Wow.
Wow.
But we only have 400 likes, guys. We got to get those likes up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know we're live. Become a member today or donate, and that'll get you in line to ask Allan Lichtman a question.
I'm just getting my book. I'll be right back.
All right, and my dad's new book is coming out soon. It's called Conservative at the Core, and he's getting it right now. And you can pre-order it, right? You can't hear me, I don't think. Is it? Can you pre-order it?
Yes.
On Amazon, right? Here it is, Conservative at the Core.
Just got selected.
A New History of American Conservatism.
By the foundation that supports Notre Dame Press as the most outstanding book published by the press this year.
What?
In any field, any book.
You want to close the door?
Singled out for special support and publicity. So, this was there some old TV show, Hannah Explains It All or something like that.
Clarissa Explains It All?
Yeah.
You don't have a microphone.
Yeah. So I need to repeat that. The book was singled out by the foundation that supports the press as the outstanding book published by the press in any field this year, singled out for special support and publicity. And as I said, there used to be an old show, Someone Explains It
Clarissa.
All. This book explains it all.
It went like I think the soundtrack went like na 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 na
Yes.
na.
This book tells you exactly how and why we got to where we are, and it explains that Trump is not an aberration. He's not an anomaly, but he is consistent with 100 years of the American conservative movement. And when you read the book, and we'll discuss it a lot in the show, you'll understand why. It's out September 1, but you can pre-order on the Notre Dame Press website. Just Google Notre Dame Press.
The link is pinned to the top of the chat right now.
Or, of course, you can order it on Amazon.
I'm going to give people a sneak peek.
Okay.
Chapter 11.
Wow.
Religion, Race, Immigrants, and Sex. In 1919, Reverend George A. Simmons, a Christian missionary in Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution, spun an alarming tale to the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on the Judiciary. Simmons claimed that Jews from the United States had incited the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. That's a sneak peek. That's pretty interesting. That was a pretty good sneak peek.
Pretty good sneak peek.
Yeah.
And he goes on to say, then they came back from They went from the east side in the U.S. to Russia, implemented the Russian Revolution, then came back to do the same thing in the U.S. And
I just realized we could put it right there.
Yeah, did the conservative senators at this time laugh at him?
They went, ha, 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 ha.
Hardly.
Oh.
They, virtually accepted what he had to say.
Oh, really? You want to close the door?
Yeah.
Okay. What were you about to say? Well, hold on one second, guys.
I was going to say these trends that we see in Trump, anti-Semitism, misogyny.
They've been around for a while.
Immigration. They have been part of our political system for a very, very long time.
We could have put the book there that whole time.
Wow.
I didn't even think about it.
Well, you need to think about you're the boss, You're,
yeah. Wait, I need to move.
All right, we're ready for our questions.
All right, our first question is from Harry Chittenden. They say, what are your thoughts on Australia's federal election, which is happening this week? We have another right-wing candidate, Peter Dutton, promising Trump-style policies and getting some heat for it. But we can't say that won't happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm no expert on Australian politics. I've never been to Australia.
Yeah, you have.
I have.
When we went to New Zealand, we flew into Australia first.
Oh.
So technically you have.
We're in the airport in Australia. But I think you're right. I think it's a toss-up what's going to happen in the election. But, this is not an official prediction. It's not based on anything other than wishful thinking. I think this Trump-style candidate, just as in Canada, is going to lose.
Can I hear your best Australian accent?
No, you won't. A good day. Not good.
Not good.
I don't know why you asked me to do these things.
Because it's funny.
Yeah.
Boboy QC says, hello, Professor Lichtman. I predicted liberal minority with my own 13. Oh, this is the person, maybe.
Yeah,
13
awesome.
Canadian keys. One of my new keys focuses on the influence of American politics on the incumbent party. Do you agree that it should be considered?
Well, I think that's brilliant. We do have, on my U.S. keys, foreign policy successes and failures. So what's going on abroad does affect the keys. But you have something much more pointed that I think is more appropriate for Canadian politics. So I commend you for what you're doing and for your successful prediction.
This is from one of our members. Remember, if you become a member, it's like the cost of a milkshake. You can get
less than a milkshake.
Right.
Yeah.
With inflation and tariffs. Where does milk even come from? Probably Denmark or something, right?
Yeah, and it's less fattening than a milkshake.
Wisconsin, that's not part of the U.S., is it? That's Canada, basically.
Nah. It's still U.S.
Oh, okay. This is from member Tarrant. I'm not sure if I said that right. Even though it was a Canadian national election, does it have some barometer for Trump's growing unpopularity in America? I think we already answered that, didn't we?
I did answer that. And absolutely right. It's all of a piece. It's all tied together. So, yes, in short.
Right. We talked a lot about that already. Thoughts on the passing of David Horowitz, a former radical leftist turned right-winger who mentored White House advisor Stephen Miller. What are the keys to the Canadian election which Pierre won?
Well, you got to consult our member who did the keys to the Canadian elections. I didn't do it. I'm no fan of David Horowitz, and I'm less of a fan of Stephen Miller, who is, one of the architects of the disaster of the first 100 days, and who, as much as Trump has misled and deceived the American people.
We don't. He's a Jew. We don't want him. We want to take his Jew card away. What do you think, Stephen Miller?
Well, I don't think I have that power.
Why not? You're Jewish.
Yeah, but we Jews don't have a pope.
Right. Maybe you could be the Jewish pope.
No thanks. I don't want to be the Jewish pope. I don't want to be the Catholic pope. I don't want to be any kind of pope.
Fair. Vacuum tubes for hi-fi. That's
one of our great fans.
Yes. They say, Professor, I hope this question is not too tough, But how is American University handling Donald J. Trump? Is it following Harvard and MIT's example, or capitulating like Columbia, or has it not faced that choice?
Unfortunately, I'm not in a great position to answer that because I'm on sabbatical. I haven't even been to the university in many months. But just from my outsider's perspective, I don't think it's yet at the point where Columbia or Harvard or MIT has come to with Trump.
Mark Carney is a former two-time central banker. Is there any history of a chairman of the Fed running for president? And do you think they have the necessary skills to do a good job?
I'm always reluctant, as you heard me say many times, to prove a negative. But I'm not aware of a chairman of the Fed running for president. They usually try to pick someone to run the Fed who is not overtly involved in politics, but is more of a economic, financial, business expert. So I don't expect that barrier to be breached anytime soon, certainly not by Mr. Powell.
How can the U.S., Canada, and other countries increase ideological representation during elections with new systems? What would those systems look like? As an example, the National Democratic Party, I think that's NDP, right? Has to shrink to boost liberals to stop conservatives, but most Canadians likely share the NDP ideology. Would ranked choice voting solve this problem? How similar to Germany, where parties form alliances like the Traffic Light or Barry's Alliance?
Well, those are two different things. You only have those kinds of alliances under a parliamentary, not a winner-take-all kind of system. But the member, who is obviously very smart, raises something called ranked choice voting. Do you know what that is, Sam?
Yes.
Can you explain it to our audience?
It's where you have the candidates, and instead of voting for one, you rank them in order of preference.
That's right. And the vote cycles until you get candidates with a majority of the vote. And so that does open the door for third parties, fourth parties, who under a first past the post, winner take all system in America have never in modern history been able to get really any kind of foothold in elective office. So that is I think, a very promising idea to pursue.
I remember on my channel, I went live and I explored ranked choice voting, and it seemed okay, but I remember running into another system that seemed even better, but now I can't remember the name of it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. If anybody remembers, put it in the chat. Is disinformation in America much worse than UK and Canada? How did Carney and Starmer win, but Kamala lose? All their economic platforms were very similar.
I do think disinformation in America was, again, I'm not an expert in UK or Canadian politics. I follow them, but, there are many others who are far more expert than I am. But, if you listen to my post-election analysis, one of the reasons I believe the keys were wrong was an explosion, a unique explosion of disinformation. We've always had disinformation, and you have it in every country around the world. But I don't think we've ever seen in any true democracy the kind of disinformation that we've had in America in 2024, to a great extent due to the richest person in the world, Elon Musk. He is richer than most nations of the world. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars electing Trump, and he controls formerly Twitter, X, and according to news reports, billions of people were exposed to his disinformation. Virtually everything he put out was disinformation. And the worst was the disinformation he put out on the abortion issue and the differences between Harris and Trump, which should have been stark. According to the exit polls, the gap between pro-choice and pro-life voters was about 36%. But the gap between Harris and Trump didn't come close. It wasn't 36%. It wasn't 20%. It wasn't 10%. It wasn't even 5%. It was just 3%. Just absurd if one understood where the candidates actually stood on the abortion issue, but it just got so muddled by the disinformation. If the gap had just been a third of the difference between pro-choice and pro-life, Harris would have won that election going away.
Avi Sabes says, with the Canadian Liberals doing what the U.S. Democrats couldn't do, are there any lessons that the U.S. Democrats can take for the next midterm/federal elections?
Yeah, again, I'm not an expert in Canadian politics, but from my outsider's perspective, I think they were far better in developing a compelling, effective message and convincing the voters that in terms of the Canadian economy, Canadian autonomy, and Canadian democracy, that the Liberals were the best choice. You know, you have heard me say I cannot count how many times, how deficient the Democrats have been for many years in messaging. You know, until they get an effective message, they're going to be struggling politically. Yes, you know, the American people have turned against Trump, but views on the Democratic Party are still quite dim.
Member Allan Lichtman says, what will be the effect of the recent terrible polls for Trump and the elections of Liberals in Canada on the Trump presidency? Specifically, could it result in a congressional blue wave in 2026, application of the 25th Amendment, and impeachment of Donald Trump, or something else?
25th Amendment, no.
Okay.
That requires J.D. Vance and a majority of the cabinet and the Congress to go along. Not going to happen. Impeachment, not going to happen in a Republican Congress.
Right.
Quite possibly it is indicative of a blue wave, but it's much too early.
Right.
But there are immediate effects that are a little bit different. Number one, when your approval rating as president is low, your clout with Congress plummets because they're not afraid of you anymore.
Right.
Two, your claims about having this tremendous mandate and this tremendous success ring much more hollow when your approval rating is down around 40%. Third, although judges are not supposed to be influenced by public opinion, you know they're human beings, and even if they won't acknowledge it, and even if it's not conscious, certainly judges are influenced by trends that are this big in public opinion.
Do you have thoughts on what appears to be the collapse of a somewhat robust multi-party system in Canada to a two-party system plus Quebec?
Yeah, you lost the Khalistan party that was supporting this separatist Sikh group in
Sikh
group in India, the Khalistan movement. Other parties have declined. When you say Quebec, I'm sure I don't pronounce it right, but it's the Bloc, Quebecois, a separatist.
Quebecois,
a separatist movement that, you know, has also held on. I think what's happening in Canada is what's happening in the U.S. People are worried, they're fearful, and they want an answer, and they want a system that can govern, not a system that falls apart for fragmentation.
Someone just said it is pronounced sick, not seek.
I said sick.
I know. I've never heard anybody call them
That's what I thought.
sick.
And I've been to India, and you haven't. I loved India, by the way. I had the most phenomenal time, did amazing lectures there. And then I went right from India to South Korea.
Right.
And the cultural shock could not be more amazing.
Yeah.
You know, India is chaotic.
Loud.
It's wild. It's loud. It's funny. South Korea is straight-laced,
right.
controlled,
right.
you know, humorless. You know, I gave a joke in one of my South Korean lectures saying, you know, I first made my prediction in 1982 of a Ronald Reagan win when he was way down in the polls. And of course, I did that when I was 9.
Right.
And someone asked me a question, how were you able when you were 9?
Right.
That's how literal-minded it was.
Right. What's your favorite Indian dish and Korean dish?
Korean barbecue and biryani, lamb biryani.
There you go, folks. Diane says, speaking of global help, is Europe going to step up for Ukraine? There hasn't been much talk about it lately.
Again, I'm not the greatest authority on European politics. I do follow it, and I think the answer is yes. I think they will step into the breach that Donald Trump seems to be unconscionably leaving in Ukraine. Whether they have the capacity to replace the United States is very much in doubt, though.
You didn't ask me what my favorite Indian and Korean food was.
Oh, I didn't know you liked Korean food. I knew you loved Indian food.
How do you?
Of course, you'd love. We were desperate to go to the Korean restaurant in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I love.
So, what's
Korean
your favorite dishes?
I mean, this isn't really an Indian dish. It was made in like Scotland, but I mean, how can you not love chicken tikka masala?
I love that too.
That might not count.
I know it doesn't really count.
I just like a dal or a chana masala.
That counts.
My favorite Korean dish is mushroom tofu soup. The spicy mushroom tofu soup.
That's really good.
Pretty good, huh?
That's really good.
What is your take on the Zalinski Trump summit at the Vatican funeral? Performance politics or move back by Trump to being an honest broker?
Who knows? Trump desperately wants to broker a peace because, he's promised to do it. He's already broken his one-day promise, but would still get a lot of credit if a legitimate peace was brokered in Ukraine. The reason I'm skeptical is that he has proposed terms that give Putin everything he wants in return for nothing and basically throw Zelensky and the Ukrainians under the bus. I don't see how they would accept that, even though Trump has tremendous leverage because they're so dependent upon American assistance. I think it would be a crime against humanity for America to stop helping Ukraine and let that murderous dictator commit more war crimes against the Ukrainian people.
Member Joe Brooks says, Dr. Lichtman, I'd like to hear your analysis regarding the Wisconsin judge who has been arrested and temporarily suspended for, quote, obstructing ICE's arrest of an immigrant in her courtroom.
On the one hand, one could just look at this as a singular instance, right? We'll see whether, she committed a crime or not. But would the Trump administration leave it at that?
No.
No. They've tried to exploit this situation where there's been no conviction. I don't even know if there's been an indictment. I know she's been arrested to launch an attack on the judiciary in general. And by the way,
BT Dubs,
who was arrested, indicted, and convicted of felonies.
Donald J. Trump.
Right. A little bit worse than what's going on with this Wisconsin judge.
Wasn't it something to do with she just brought the immigrant in through a back room rather than the public hallway or something like that?
That's apparently what went on. And I have a feeling she's not going to be convicted of anything. She's only been arrested. I don't know if she's been indicted, but she certainly has not been convicted of anything. And I think we have something in America, do you remember this, Sam, called innocent until proven guilty?
No.
It doesn't exist for Donald Trump. They make it as if, she's public enemy number one. I guess maybe Albrego Garcia, who they claim is a terrorist, a gang member, without a shred of proof, is public enemy number one.
Today, an executive order was signed designed to punish, quote, sanctuary cities. What do you think the repercussions will be?
There's going to be another protracted lawsuit. Sanctuary cities is, a complete misnomer. It's a political name just made up. nobody really knows what a sanctuary city is. The literature on this is completely unclear, but supposedly it's cities or other jurisdictions that are not fully cooperating with the detention and deportation policies of ICE, whether they have to do so and whether what they're doing is illegal. This is now also, like everything else Trump is doing, going to go into the courts.
I'm so bored of the courts.
I know.
It takes forever.
I know.
It's so
but
boring.
What's the Congress doing?
Diddly.
Nothing. Not only aren't they standing up for their role in checks and balances, but as far as I can tell, they haven't passed a single notable piece of legislation.
Right. Why has nobody talked? That's true. I didn't even think about that until you just said it. Why has no one talked about that? That this giant, red wave of Congress, Senate, the House, they haven't passed anything. They haven't done it. They haven't passed anything.
Nothing.
Weird. I guess they're just expecting Trump to rule through executive order.
I guess.
I don't know. It's weird.
I don't know. There's only so much you can do through executive orders without Congress acting.
Right. We have 1,600 people watching, but only 800 likes. I want to get that to 1,000 likes. What do you think, Dad?
I love that, and let's get the members and the donations.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we have a great audience, and support us. Let's get to more questions.
Oh, where was I? I almost called you Professor Trump.
Oh, please.
My dyslexia kicked in.
Yeah, that's kind of doubly inaccurate.
There's a comma after the professor in this question. Professor, comma, the Trump administration has begun removing divisive content from museums, most notably the National Museum of African American History and Culture. This museum and many others exists because of an act of the U.S. Congress.
I get it. Yeah, I got it. Very good question. Look, what does Trump care about acts of Congress, Sam?
We just said that they want him to just rule through executive order. They're not even doing anything.
And, was USAID, the Consumer Protection Agency, Department of Education, were those all set up under acts of Congress?
Yes.
Yes. And he's, dead set on dismantling them. And now he's got his target, as you say, on the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And literally every element of the Smithsonian and other repositories of American heritage and culture. By the way, they're so ignorant that they were going to object to an exhibit on the Enola Gay. You know what the Enola Gay was?
The airplane that dropped the bomb?
And you know why they objected to it?
Because it had the word gay in it? No.
They ultimately withdrew that. But can you imagine? This is what we're facing here. This is part of a much bigger, what he's doing with the Smithsonian and other institutions is also a piece, what he's doing to our colleges and universities and our K-12 education. Simply put, he wants to impose on our cultural institutions, our educational institutions, his own distorted, politically driven version of American history and culture. If you want to see what it is, I think I've mentioned this before, check out the 1776 report that Trump issued at the very end of his administration and Biden canceled. This report so tortures our history and our society in the interest of conservative politics that 47 of Americans' leading scholarly and academic institutions denounced it as a hack job, a politically driven history that has no bearing on scholarship on American history and American society. That's what this is all about. And really, in many ways, the fate of our nation depends upon freedom of thought, freedom to teach, the search for truth. And Trump is trying to destroy all that. And we've seen it happening already in the states. Just look at the way in which states like Texas and Florida are controlling what public institutions can teach and research.
He wants to
and, of course, they're banning the books.
He wants to be the president. He wants to control Hollywood. He wants to control higher education. He wants to be the Pope.
And he wants to be head of the Kennedy Center.
Right.
Yes.
Right. That was part of
control,
Hollywood.
Yeah. Entertainment.
The arts. Yeah. The Smithsonian.
Right. The Smithsonian. You name it.
Wow. Crazy.
Maybe he's not just wanting to be a king. He wants to be an emperor.
I think you've cracked the code.
Yeah, I think so.
He wants to start the Trump dynasty.
Yes.
Wow.
And he wants to then pass it on to Don Jr. I
know. Sorry. We're at 939 likes. We have 5 minutes left to get to 1,000 likes, Dad.
We'll get there.
On this episode. You're confident. This is from member Shay Baby. They say, could Dems go to the UN for help prosecuting Donald J. Trump and other criminals?
I don't think the UN prosecutes. It's the International Criminal Court that does the prosecution. It's issued actually a warrant for Donald Trump's counterpart in Israel. You know who that is, of course. Netanyahu. But we are not signatories to the ICC, so it would have no force of law here in the U.S.
Can we revoke Netanyahu's Jew card, too, along with Stephen Miller?
I think maybe Netanyahu's even before his.
Yeah, I think so. This is from Zen Wave Function. They say, how can we ensure the DOJ will never be used by the executive branch for political expediency again after this administration?
Yeah, if you read my book, I have a whole series of reforms on this, 13 cracks, repairing American democracy after Trump. But of course, no matter what safeguards you put in, Sam, what's the problem?
It relies on the virtue of people in politics, or whatever you said earlier.
Exactly. That was James Madison's great warning to all of us from the grave. long ago.
Yes. How many more questions you want? We're nearing 10 p.m. Eastern time.
3 more, but not that long one. Or you maybe shorten it a bit if you want to ask that one.
Should the masses who are finally coming together, irrespective of party with Bernie and AOC, create a third party?
No, and no. There has been a long history of third parties.
Right.
Going all the way back to the anti-Mason party in the early 20th century, including the Prohibition Party, the Free Soil Party, the Socialist Party, the Progressive Party, the Libertarian Party, the Reform Party. And how much power have these third parties obtained?
None.
You know, we really are, for the foreseeable future, a two-party system. And the real choices are between the two major parties. As sympathetic as I might be to ideas of the third party, we are desperate now, and we can't afford to fracture.
But I think AOC and Bernie can exist in the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
Why not?
Yeah. I'm very high on AOC, and, you know, at some point I'm going to talk about potential Democratic nominees for 2028.
You keep teasing that.
But we got 3.5 years, so it's not
true.
It's imminent.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, a couple more questions.
All right. Should the courts have their own police force or army in the future?
They kind of do, but they kind of don't. The U.S. Marshals are supposed to enforce court orders, but the U.S. Marshals are under the jurisdiction of
the executive branch,
the Department of Justice.
Right.
You know, so it's very difficult for the courts to independently enforce, and I do not advocate assigning police forces or armies to the courts. I think that's going a little far, but my mind could be changed.
There are still U.S. Marshals? When I think of U.S. Marshals...
There absolutely are U.S. Marshals.
Oh, I didn't even know. When I think of U.S. Marshals, I think of like old John Ford movies.
Yeah,
they're
a little different. They deal with fugitives. They do things like put people in protective witness protection.
Right.
That's part of the U.S. Marshal Service.
You didn't let me do my Marshal, my old Western Marshal impression.
I'm not stopping you.
No, not you. Too late now. What are your thoughts about the Dunning-Kruger effect in the United States, specifically the way people want to believe anti-science rhetoric from RFK Jr., thinking Googling why can't I say that word?
Constitutes
research, and that dedicated public servants like Anthony Fauci are the enemy.
Yeah. You know, the great historian Richard Hofstadter many years ago wrote a book about anti-intellectualism in the United States. Reactions against intellectuals, against science, against social science has always been with us. And it has, of course, come to the fore right now, not just with RFK, although he's the poster child for it, but also erasing climate change, as if climate change didn't exist. We can't even talk about it, much less research it. Freezing or canceling grants for incredibly important scientific and medical research. You know, this anti-intellectualism can be very appealing. It's part of Trump's appeal. Oh, you know, those elites out there in the Ivy Leagues, you know, who are getting all this exorbitant money and just doing nothing. You know, it's got a certain appeal and a certain ring to it, but there does seem now to be a reaction against it. And a lot of smart Americans are rising up against this tide of mud, as Freud called the ignorant.
All right, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for the night. I want to give some shout-outs to donators who didn't get on air. Jim Blowers, Philip H., Cher Thomas, Jacob Calabrese, The Bard, Ollie, and Marcellus Wallace.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Final word, shining light from Canada. You know,
No, I'm supposed to say, Dad, what are your final words to the people?
Oh.
Now go.
Did I stomp on you there?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I just gave it. Shining light coming from Canada. A ray of hope. And maybe that light will penetrate the United States. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. We greatly appreciate you all.
No doubt. We hit 1,000 likes. And also the good news is the Lichtman Live post show is coming up.
Wow.
In a few minutes. So make sure you stay around and you check around for that. Good night.
Good night. That's really good news, of course.
What is?
A young, sharp guy coming up.